Hi there, my name is Dillard, one of the coordinators for the 2014 Tennessee High School Ethics Bowl. This is part 3 of a 4-part ethics tutorial series. In this tutorial, we will explore the question, what is utilitarian ethics? Utilitarian ethics is the idea that what matters most in our moral judgments are the consequences. That is to say, something is morally right or wrong depending on the consequences. The most notable form of utilitarian ethics takes happiness to have the greatest utility. Something is overall right or wrong depending on whether or not it maximizes happiness and minimizes harm for the greatest number of people. This is also called the greatest happiness principle. Under this, we can distinguish two kinds of utilitarianism: act and rule utilitarianism. Act utilitarianism focuses on the utility of particular actions, while rule utilitarianism focuses on the utility of particular rules. In either case, whether a particular action is right or wrong, or whether it would be right or wrong to follow a particular rule, depends upon the consequences of acting in that way or of following that rule. For example, suppose there was a rule that said, if a person is a woman, then it would not be permissible for that person to be employed. Now suppose you are an employer who is considering the employment application of someone who is a woman. So what would be the consequences of following that rule? Would following that rule maximize the happiness of the greatest number of people in society? If we allowed that half the people in society are female, and further that every female desires to work, then the consequences of following that rule would amount to frustrating half the people in society. Hence, rule utilitarianism would tell us that it would be morally wrong to follow that rule, because following it would not maximize the happiness of the greatest number of people. Let's consider one final example. Suppose you are parallel parking, and as you are backing in, you hit the car behind you. You look around and see that no one saw this happen, so you ask yourself, should I contact the police to report the accident, or should I leave since no utilitarianism? Act utilitarianism asks you to consider the consequences of your action. If you left without contacting the police, then that person would be angry that someone had damaged their vehicle. Moreover, you might even feel a lot of guilt about damaging someone else's property without making the attempt to reimburse them for damages. Finally, even though you might feel some relief about escaping from a financial burden, you also feel that you wouldn't want someone to leave if they had damaged your vehicle. Thus, even though you would glean some small amount of pleasure from escaping a financial burden, this pleasure is outweighed by the unhappiness you will cause yourself and the other person. Therefore, act utilitarianism would, for this reason, tell you that it would be morally wrong to leave and morally right to contact the police. Utilitarianism, whether act or rule, asks you to consider all the kinds of pleasures and harms which would come about. If the consequences of an act or rule are such that it would maximize pleasure for the greatest number, then it would maximize the happiness for the greatest number, and therefore would tell us that the act or rule would be morally right. In sum, utilitarian ethics asks us to consider the consequences of our actions and of our rules, maximize the pleasure and thereby happiness for the greatest number of people, minimize the harm and thereby unhappiness for the greatest number of people, and finally, to consider the happiness of other people, not just one's own happiness. And that's utilitarian ethics. The Tennessee High School Ethics Bowl is made possible by the generous grants from the University of Tennessee at Knoxville, College of Arts and Sciences, Department of Philosophy, in collaboration with the Parr Center for Ethics.